Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today. For some of us, it's again today, but for a whole new experience on quite a new topic. So I'm very glad that we were all able to come together. Before I introduce our speaker, I have some more thank yous to add to what is a very long list. And you heard some of them yesterday, the President and the Middle East Committee, and today I divided these into two. And today I'd like to thank the Vice President for Academic Affairs and the International Studies Program for their support in this program, and all the faculty involved in that program, and at Emmanuel, and all of you students for making this such an exciting learning environment. We've had a great time in the classes, and yesterday as well. And once again, I want to say I cannot thank One World Boston, the affiliate of the Cummings Foundation, which has supported this program all the way through. And without them, we could not possibly have this exciting week of events, bringing our scholars from the Middle East to explore the challenges of democracy and peace in the Middle East. And that really is our theme over this week. I'd also like to announce at the beginning of this gathering that we will have a chance, and you'll have a chance, to meet both speakers at the reception that'll follow in the reading room of the library. We just thought that it was winter and we'd make it easy for us all to get together. So we'll meet again, much less formally, in the library main reading room for a few light refreshments and some more talk. And one last, but certainly not least, thank you, and I have to say it's a thank you in absentia, and that is to Courtney Gately for her unstinting work in bringing this week together. She dealt with the posters, as did Molly Honan and Andrea Thomas, and she worked with the faculty and students about notices. She worked on the travel arrangements, which was not easy, the hotel reservations. She managed to get it all done in the middle of a snowstorm and in the midst of everything else she does. So she might not be here, but I hope she'll know and hear this through the airwaves that we're all very grateful, and I am especially so. Our speaker today, Ron Pundak. Dr. Pundak played a decisive role in the Oslo peace process. These groundbreaking negotiations began with secret talks in Oslo, exploring and negotiating basic principles of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Dr. Pundak helped to create, and that's very important here, he helped to create the secret track of the unofficial negotiations in the beginning of 1993. He then became a member of the official Israeli negotiating team in the latest stage of the Oslo process. And we know that culminated in the historic signing of the Declaration of Principles on September 13th, 1993, on the White House lawn. The Oslo process held out the promise of a two-state solution with a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza alongside the State of Israel within 5 years. That was the promise. The Declaration of Principles itself was a great achievement, since it brought the two sides together to mutually recognize each other and laid out a plan for further action, and that mutual recognition is so key here. But the most important issues, known as the final status issues of borders and Israeli settlements, security, refugees, and Jerusalem, remained unsolved. Throughout the negotiations, Dr. Pundak worked with then Foreign Minister, now President, Shimon Peres, as well as his deputy, Yossi Beilin, and later with the late Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. As we all know, Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated on November 4th, 1995, by a right-wing Israeli fanatic. Though the process continued after the assassination of the Prime Minister, it did not reach a two-state solution. Following the Oslo negotiations, Dr. Pundak served as the executive director of the Economic Cooperation Foundation, working on political and economic issues related to a two-state solution. From 2001 to 2011, Dr. Pundak served as the Director General of the Paris Center for Peace. And this Paris Center for Peace is the largest Israeli organization dealing with Arab-Israeli peace. And he did that for 10 years. That's quite something. He's currently co-chair of the Palestinian Israeli Peace NGO Forum. That's a joint forum consisting of some 100 organizations working on bilateral projects to foster peace. He has led and participated in numerous Israeli-Palestinian Track 2 activities connected with the resolution of those final status issues. These two-track meetings bring together academics and opinion makers. They're close to policymakers, but they aren't policymakers, to explore ideas for moving to resolution of the final status issues and to help prepare the Israeli and Palestinian publics for the compromises that peace will ask from both sides. In all of these activities, Dr. Pundak has not only negotiated with Palestinians, he has had to stand his ground with more hardline Israelis, sometimes at great cost to his own career. Dr. Pundak received his PhD in Middle Eastern political history from the University of London, the School of Oriental and African Studies, to which I should say one of our former students has gone. And I should also point out, for those of you who are journalism majors, communication majors, that prior to his activities on the peace process, Dr. Pundak worked as a journalist for Haaretz, that I would say is something like the equivalent of the New York Times in Israel. With President Obama's plans to visit Israel and the West Bank this March, Dr. Pundak's talk today, 5 personal stations in one national conflict, can Israel and Palestine reach peace? It just could not be a more timely talk. So it is therefore with great pleasure and expectation that I give the podium to Dr. Ron Pundak.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Lenore, both for initiating these days and inviting me to this beautiful campus. And I want to thank also Emmanuel College for arranging it. And specifically also I would like to say many thanks to my, I hope I can call you now a partner, Sadiq El-Azam, who yesterday gave a very brilliant lecture. I hope most of you heard it. I think it expanded our understanding about the Arab civil society in these very interesting days. I picked the topic of today in order to try and bring you closer to our issues. After all, I mean, you are in the United States, quite distant from the issues, and I thought that maybe I'll combine both historical approach as well as personal approach, as well as my experience in the activities, which will lead to understanding a bit, better understanding the question. And then I'll try also to give an answer to the most important and relevant question for us: can we do it? And trying to combine my, personal life, my family's life. It is, very normal Israeli family, but our story in a way epitomizes something which is connected to 100 years of Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in which life, personal life, and national life are sometimes converging and are influencing. And to some extent, I would even say that some of the activities of the individual, whether it is in science or politics or anything else, is also connected to the experience and to the life of the individual or of his surrounding. Since we don't have much time, I will plunge into the first stage. The first stage of the family, of my family, goes back to the previous century, to 1905. The Jews, as you know, we wandering people spread all over the world. We are speaking at a specific time, 1905, when anti-Semitism around the area of Russia, Poland, Ukraine was very, very, very strong. We called this period the period of pogroms, where Jews were just slaughtered and killed because they were Jews as part of internal issues in the Russian Empire. 1905, it's one of the points in which there were problems in Russia, and one of the ways, and we see it not only in Russia at that time, to divert pressure from within is to find an enemy, and the enemy at that time were Jews. Altogether, it was quite difficult times for many, many people, not only for Jews at that time in Russia, and most of the biggest waves of Jewish population from Russia in these areas to the United States happened at this period. But specifically, this family that I'm referring to, my father's family, my mother's family, one lived in Ukraine, one lived in Latvia, other in Mezrich, in many areas in this eastern part of Europe. We're living in small villages. And in 1905, in one of the villages, which is called Romny, my great-grandfather was, in one of the mornings, asked to come by the heads of the Cossacks, those who were behind the pogroms, those who were after the Jews, those who attacked the Jews. He was called by the head of the Cossacks, and the man told him, "Mr. Pundak, come with me, take your wife and your kid. If this order comes from this man, you do what he demands." And he walked with him, hand in hand, according to the story of my grandfather. And they reached the part, this village was around 1/3 Jews, 2/3 Christians, Gentiles, Russians. And they reached the house, the home of this man. He took his small family up to the second floor. He told my grandfather, "Now you wait here, and you won't move until I call you." The night passes, and next morning, the man comes back and tells him, "Now you can go home." He goes home, and he sees that the whole Jewish quarter is in flames, houses demolished, people killed, probably women raped. If not at this place, other places it happened. A tragedy. The following day he goes to this Cossack and asks him, "Why did you save your life, my life?" And his answer was simple. The man was a hat maker, my great-grandfather. And he told him, "You are doing very beautiful hats to my Cossacks." And this was the reason that he decided to keep him alive. My great-grandfather decided after a few days that probably there would be a better hat maker. And in no time, they packed and they started to move. They moved up north, like many Jews at that time. Most went to the States, some to Western Europe, and some to Palestine, land of Israel. This is the time that national ideas regarding statehood for the Jews started to crystallize. The first movement of Jews to Palestine in order to create a safe haven for the Jews started around 1882. But the biggest move at that time was close to 1905. Around 40,000 Jews came from these areas and created the first kibbutzim, the first idea of kibbutz in Israel. This is the time when David Ben-Gurion, later to become the father of the nation, the first prime minister, came also to Palestine, to the land of Israel. The idea of that time was the Jews cannot live anymore in the diaspora. The diaspora is a threat to the Jews. This threat clearly was manifested in a much worse situation, as we all know, during the end of the 30s, beginning of 40s, which in a minute I'll discuss it. But the feeling among Jews was that we are not welcome in Europe, that we have a place in the Middle East, which historically we had a country, we had a state, we have our history there. There has always been Jews living there. Every Jew literally was praying next year in Jerusalem. And this was the moment in history the Jews felt that the need to find a place for themselves. But this was not in a vacuum. This was at a time that nation states were actually at the end of the 19th century, since 1880, 40, 50, 70. It wasn't something, a phenomenon which was only connected to Jews, but Germany was created, Italy was created, countries were created, borders were delineated, and also the Jews wanted a place for themselves. So this family moves from Ukraine, and after 2 years, which we don't know exactly what was the process, they are reaching to Denmark. On the way to the United States, they wanted to go to the States. The nearest port at that time was Germany, at the northern Europe, and the ship stopped in Denmark, and somebody probably persuaded this man that Denmark is not such a bad place. They landed in Denmark, and they started a new life in Denmark. In 1927, my father was born in Denmark. As a Dane, as a young Dane, Jewish family, obviously with Zionist ideas connected, but living quite nice life in a new world, in a new place which is called Denmark. But life are not easy, and they are leading us to the second stage. Second stage happens, as I just mentioned, at the Second World War. Second World War, which started, as we all remember, 1939, Denmark is lucky to be out of the war. The war doesn't touch Denmark. And the interesting thing is that the Danes, the Jews, are kept alive until a certain moment in October 1943, when the Germans decides to make an action. 2 big boats are being sent to Copenhagen from Germany to collect the Jews, to send them to concentration camps, into the gas chambers. We all remember the Holocaust, we all remember what happened in the Second World War. Just to remind our memory, this was a period in which the Nazi system were after the Jews for the sake and for the reason only that they were Jews. Not only Jews who were born Jews, but also Jews who either the father or mother or grandmother or grandfather, i.e., if there was a Christian 3 generation, the fact that his grandfather was a Jew was enough in order to send him to the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and other places. At the end of the war, as we all remember, something like 6 million Jews were killed, were assassinated, were gassed, and disappeared. This is 1943. The rumor starts penetrating the Jewish community, and what is happening, which is a very, very interesting phenomenon, is that the Germans are trying to do it, but the Danish population is coming united to rescue the Jews. And at one night in October, my father's family, my mother's family, in different places, are being rescued by Danes and are shipped by boats from Denmark to Sweden. And most of the Danish community was saved like this. And almost no one was taken to Germany or to Poland. The few who were taken were saved eventually. And my father and my mother, teenagers, are fleeing, are becoming refugees, and are running away to Sweden until the end of the war in 1945. It's another element in our life of being persecuted, of feeling that we are not welcome, only because we are what we are. Not because we are good or bad, not because we have committed any sin, but because we have relation to what is being perceived by others as a threat. As a threat which is based on racism, a threat which is based on hatred for a group of people. The war ends, leading us to the third stage. And the third stage is 1948, the War of Independence. As time passed, it was very clear that Israel is going to be created. I won't enter into the history of the creation of the state, but basically we are speaking about the end of the British mandate and the British Empire in the Middle East. The British are withdrawing from different places, including India and Pakistan and Greece, and Palestine is one of the places. And the question is what to do with Palestine, and this is starting to bring us to the issue that we will discuss in a minute. And the decision by the United Nations is a decision which we call the partition decision, or decision 181 of the General Assembly of the United Nations. And the decision is to split this territory between two nations, the Palestinian nation and the Jewish nation, and to create two states for the two peoples. In a way, this is a period in which there are two forces and two powers and two national movements which are fighting on the same piece of land, based on a zero-sum situation, on a situation in which the Jews who started, as I say, to come to this area to create their own country at the end of the 19th century are building themselves there. And from the point of view of these people, this country is empty. From the point of view of the perception of those who came from Europe to create a nation and to create a place and to create a safe haven for them. But practically on the ground, not only there were people there, but there were people who gradually during these years have become also a nation. And this is the end of the time of the empire, the Ottoman Empire, and I am going back before 1917, the Ottoman Empire who ruled this area, and after the British mandate came in, gradually nations have started to be created in the region, Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Egypt and Jordan, and also the Palestinians, from their point of view, wanted self-determination and wanted to be not only a nation, but a nation in Palestine. And suddenly we have here conflicting interests between two nations, two national movements, which are claiming a very basic claim. This piece of land that they call Palestine and we call Eretz Israel, each side looks at it as if it is only theirs. And when time comes and passes, the question is, for the British, what do we do with this piece of land? And eventually what the British do, they are giving it back to the UN, to the Security Council, and they end the mandate. And the United Nations eventually decides that this piece of land belongs to the two nations, and the only option is partition, and if possible, a confederation between the two sides. But the Arabs do not accept it. The Jews hardly, but eventually accepts it. And it results are the War of 48. I don't want to enter into the description of the war, but again, the third stage, from my point of view, my family story, is that my father, post-war, seeing all what has happened to the Jews, decides to volunteer and to go to fight in Palestine in order to assist the creation of a state. He comes together with 35 other volunteers from Denmark. They are coming to assist the state, not because he wanted to live there, but he thought that this is the solution which will answer the problem of Jews all over the world. And he arrives one day before the war breaks out, and in no time he's at the front. A man who comes from the splendid life of Denmark suddenly gets into a fight. The story goes that he and his colleagues didn't even have, I'm not speaking about ammunition and rifles that were not provided, but even fatigue or a uniform or something. And they come and they buy and eventually they find themselves in a war that actually his first shoes were shoes that he took from a friend of his who was killed a day before. The Israeli system was not ready yet, and the war breaks out, and he spends a year in Israel until the war ends. The war ends with a huge Israeli victory. Unexpected from the point of view of the Arab countries. The Egyptians participated, the Lebanese participated, the Jordanians participated, the Syrians participated, the Iraqis participated. And the Arab world at that time thought it would be quite an easy march to fight against the Israeli new coming state. But at the end of the day, it was a huge Israeli victory and a terrible thing which happened to the Palestinians. Two things are relevant from our point of view regarding the war. A, half of the Palestinian population, out of 1.4 million Palestinians, half of them became refugees as a result of the war. I will not enter to the reason of how did they become refugees, but this is a combination of the events of the war, policy by the Israeli army to get rid of many, fear, and many other reasons. But the refugee becomes a refugee not when he leaves his home, but when he is unable to come back. And the Israeli decision at the end of the war was not to allow any Palestinian to go back to his home, to his village, to his place where he was having his life for many, many hundreds of years. And in a day or in a week or a few months, suddenly we are facing the situation of half of the Palestinian people becoming refugees. This is what is called the Nakba. And second is the fact that Israel is actually growing, and instead of the promise, according to the delineation of the 181 resolution of Israel of approximately 55% of the land of Israel, Palestine, whatever you call it, and the Palestinian state in 45%. The new demarcation of the ceasefire in 1940, or armistice line in 1949, Israel is controlling something like 78% of the territories, and the West Bank and Gaza are consisting of 22% of the territories. My father goes back home to Denmark. He doesn't think of moving to Israel. He has made what he thought is the right thing, and Denmark is waiting. And he goes back, he studies, he gets married with my mother, my dear mother. In 1952, my brother in Denmark is being born, and developments are changing one mindset. And in 1954, he decides to do what we call in Hebrew aliyah, which is to move to Israel. And they move to Israel. They moved to Israel and are starting a new life in Israel. Time passes, and the 67 war happens. Again, I don't want to enter into the description of the war, but the war happens and it ended with Israel occupying the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Sinai Desert, and the Golan Heights. Then we move later to the 73 war. And 73 war, from my point of view, is my fourth stage. Again, the conversion of my life or our life and the situation. In this war, Israel learns a lesson. The Syrians and the Egyptians are attacking Israel in surprise, and Israel is suffering a real, strong fist in our face. For the first 2 days, Israel is bleeding. Eventually, things are turning upside down, and Israel ends the war, threatening Damascus and Cairo. But we are learning a lesson. We are learning a lesson that arrogancy and the feeling of strength and omnipotentia is not something which serves the interest of a country. Because between 67 and 73, we thought of ourselves as a mini power, as a country which no one can defeat. And in 73, we understood for the first time, and good for us that we understood it, that power has limitations. And you cannot conduct policies only through power. You cannot coerce a peace agreement through your power. And as I say, this is the fourth stage of my family. My brother was a young officer at the Israeli army at the age of 21. And towards the end of the war, his tank at the front with the Egyptians suffered a very severe hit, and he didn't make the day. After less than a day, he was killed, he was dead. He was able actually to be flying in from the place to the hospital in Tel Aviv, which is this distance from our home. If this is the hospital, we live here. After a few hours, he passed away. We did not know that it has happened because he came in as an anonymous soldier. Undoubtedly a tragedy to our family, but a tragedy which did not change our position regarding the only solution which will serve the interest of Israel, which is peace, negotiations, and understanding of the other side. I was a young man at the age of 18 at that time. I did my service in the army as all Israelis went to learn. In 1991, I came back to Israel. And in 1992, 1993, I started my march towards changing realities through promoting peace, negotiation, dialogue, and fairness. And this takes me to the fifth stage of my involvement, as was just briefly described in the Oslo peace process. And I want to talk 2 minutes about the Oslo peace process and then try to conclude with a question and the answer. The whole idea that we try to promote is to say both sides made many mistakes in the past, both us and the Palestinians. Negating the other cannot help anybody. At the same time, trying to think that we can change the past will not lead us anywhere. And the whole idea of Oslo was to change totally the whole dialogue and the concept towards a solution, which instead of being based on how can we coerce the Palestinians to accept what we want, we should sit with the Palestinians eye to eye, same level, based not on our past, but on our joint interest in a different future. And see whether these two national movements, which always fought each other, sometimes diplomatically and sometimes through terrorism and sometimes through the army, whether we are able to reach a fair agreement which will not be the optimist agreement, it will not be the solution for everything according to all utopian dreams, but will be something which will be based on realpolitik and will actually assist and strengthen the interest of both sides. And the interest of both sides is to have two states to live side by side and start investing in the future rather than investing in the past. The process was an unorthodox approach of two individuals, my colleague Yair Hirschfeld, who at that time had much more experience and knowledge and connection, and myself, two doctors, coming from the total outside, two individuals who were not part of the official system, but with access to the Israeli formal system, with an understanding that the solution will not go through us choosing the partner, but through us dealing with the partner which is being chosen by the partner. Which means that we started a dialogue with the PLO when Israel formally did not speak with the PLO, when Israel did not accept the PLO as representing the Palestinian people, and we said, no, the only option is to speak with your enemy and to dialogue with the enemy towards something which will change the situation. And what happened was that we started a process which had two phases. The first phase was us two Israelis with a total deniability and being able to negotiate a kind of a pre-negotiation process with the other side, created eventually a blueprint for an agreement. I won't enter into description of the negotiations because of very short time, but basically what I want to just give an example. When we started the negotiation at the second meeting, we actually presented a paper which is a method in the negotiations which did not present or represent the Israeli point of view, but represented something that from our point of view was a compilation of what we knew is the Palestinian position, what we knew is the Israeli government's position, what we knew that the two sides can move forward. And by this we were able to do a frog leap towards a paper which was already something which will lead us very fast into thorough negotiations. Something which took into account not only our position but also their position, and something which was based on the knowledge about the two sides and understanding or trying to understand the other side. And the Palestinian reaction to this was identical, not in trying to enforce their ideas as a token in negotiations to try and persuade us to accept their principal position, which were outrageous at that time, but to present positions which were realistic and will be enabling us to move towards something, which is a solution which will be accepted by both sides. The process was very, very intensive and led us eventually to the second stage, in which the Israeli government entered formally into this informal, clandestine, deniable process, and we moved towards formal negotiations between the government of Israel and the PLO in Oslo in a very secret back channel, parallel to negotiations which took place, and eventually on the 13th of September 1993, at the south lawn of the White House, we signed what is known as the Declaration of Principle, which established mainly two things. A, something which from my point of view is the most important in the process, which is mutual recognition between two national movements. Meaning that if until then we did not accept them, and they did not accept us, we did not accept their existence, did not accept our existence, we did not accept the PLO, we did not accept the Israeli regime. And if until then it was, as I say, the zero-sum game, everything or nothing, everything is ours or everything is yours, for the first time the two sides are saying, we recognize your legitimate rights. We recognize the Palestinian legitimate rights, and they are recognizing our legitimate rights. As two national movements in this small piece of land. And the second pillar is the pillar of the process, accepting that the objective of future negotiations is to implement Security Council Resolution 242, which speaks about the idea of territories for peace, which should lead at the third stage, or second or third stage, into the idea of two-state solution, side by side, based on the 67 borders. Time passes, and we are now 20 years after Oslo. 20 hard years in which there were ups and downs, in which we had better and worse prime ministers. We had prime ministers who really tried to achieve peace on the Israeli side and were not able because of many reasons. And we had a prime minister, or actually more than one prime minister, who didn't want to reach peace. Specifically, I'm referring to Benjamin Netanyahu, who, from my point of view, wants peace as a principle. But what he is ready to offer the Palestinians is, distance away of an offer which may be accepted by anybody. Impossible. And specifically, I'm speaking about the issues of territories, the issue of Jerusalem, the issue of settlements, the issue of security. Actually, all issues, the distance is too high, it's too big. During the years, we went through ups and downs, as I said. We had the Camp David negotiations in 2000, led by Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel at that time, and Yasser Arafat at the other side. Two very impressive leaders, both made huge mistakes. We had the third party who tried to overcome these hurdles and gaps, namely the American administration led by President Clinton. But eventually Camp David collapsed. I won't enter into the many reasons. I think Clinton made many mistakes in his administration. I think the Palestinians made huge mistakes. But I think the main hurdle to reach an agreement in 2000 was the Israeli position. And this again leads me to the question of yes or no. There is one thing which should be clear to anybody, to any Israeli leader and to any observer or anybody in the world who will participate in promoting and fostering peace between us and the Palestinians. The Palestinians, and rightly so, will not accept ever a solution to the problem which will not be based on what has happened between us and the Egyptians in the negotiations and what has happened between us and the Jordanians and us and the Syrians. i.e., there is no solution which doesn't take the borders of 67 as a given within which a Palestinian state will be created. Now, within this, there are modalities in order to integrate realities on the ground. For example, Israel, whether you like it or not, has huge numbers of settlers and settlements in the West Bank. Some of them practically will not be able to uproot. And we are speaking about a realpolitik solution. So there should be eventually some annexation of Palestinian territories in the West Bank in order to cater for solution. But the only way to make it happen is that there will be a total reciprocity and equal swaps of territories, meaning that if we are annexing 5% or 2% of the Palestinian territories, we'll give them the same amount of land from Israel in order for them to be able to go back to their people and say, we got the same deal as all the Arab countries, meaning 100% of the territories which were occupied in 67. Similarly with Jerusalem, there is no solution between us and the Palestinians in which Jerusalem will not be also the capital of Israel as well as the capital of the Palestinians. No solution. Any Israeli politician who says that Jerusalem will stay united under Israeli sovereignty doesn't know what does he speak about, or maybe knows very well but doesn't want to reach an agreement. So this vocabulary that we listen and hear from many politicians in Israel actually means that they actually don't want to reach peace with the Palestinians. I think that all issues are solvable. I was engaged in few activities, exercises, whatever you would like to call them, between us and the Palestinians, whether it is the Geneva Initiative, whether it is the document which is called the Yossi Beilin Abu Mazen Understandings, all actually are providing blueprints which were negotiated, drafted, accepted by senior leaders from both sides, meaning it's not a unilateral exercise. It's something which in a way represents the majority of Israelis and Palestinians, which shows that on each of the issues, each of the core issues, there is a practical and acceptable solution which demands concessions for both sides, but concessions that are possible to be implemented and eventually will serve the interest of both sides. So the answer to the question, practically, can we make it? The answer is definitely yes. If the answer is, do we have a constituency on both sides who will accept it? The answer is a bit more complicated, but the answer is still yes. And I say complicated because when polls are being taken for years now, and people on both sides are being asked, are you or will you support a solution which is based on A, B, C, D, as the description of the different plans which I mentioned, you have an overwhelming majority on both sides, whether on the Palestinians or Israeli, including in the Gaza Strip. Something like 65-70% on both sides were saying, yes, we will be supportive of this kind of solution, meaning the period of ideology of everything is ours or everything is theirs during these 20 years has gone. But if you ask the same people, and this is the complicated part of it, if you ask the same people, will it happen? You'll get again 60 to 70% will say no. And if you ask them why won't it happen, we Israelis are blaming them and saying they are not reliable and trustworthy partner for peace. And if you ask the Palestinians, they'll say the Israelis are not trustworthy and reliable party for peace. And we will say they are killing us and bombing us and shelling us and rocketing us, and this is actually manifesting what they really want, which is the end of Israel. And they will say we are building in the settlements, we are building in the territories, we are in a apartheid regime, we don't want peace. When we know that both peoples want peace. And the question is, how do we overcome this huge gap between perception, wishes, and reality? And for this, there's only one solution. And the solution is to have a courageous leader, specifically on our side. Because on the Palestinian side, we have today the best leader that we can wish, that we can pray for. Abu Mazen is not only courageous, but is an honest, straightforward man of peace who was behind the Oslo process and behind all activities to change realities on the ground and create a nation which will lead itself towards statehood and peace, fighting terrorism, negating terrorism and violence, and a courageous man that I believe will be able to carry his people to peace. And his entourage, his leadership, is very similarly holding the same position. On the Israeli side, as I said, we have a leader, we have a prime minister who ideologically and practically is not against peace and speaks about two states, but what he's willing to offer, the maximum that he's willing to offer, will never meet the basic needs and acceptance by everybody for two states. Add to this the fact that in year 2002, in March, there was a dramatic change in the Arab nations, Arab League, the 22 countries of the Arab nation, in regards to Israel, by the promotion of what we call the Arab Peace Initiative, which says something which is a drama in the Middle East, which was not as seen as a drama in Israel, but is historically a drama, which is the Arab countries are accepting Israel, are ready to normalize relations with Israel, to have diplomatic ties and commercial ties with Israel and embassies with Israel, under one condition, that Israel will withdraw from the West Bank, Gaza, and Golan Heights, and sign peace with both the Palestinians and the Syrians, and based on, obviously, the idea of a Palestinian state side by side with Israel. Unfortunately, there was no Israeli partner to accept it. So currently, the situation is the following. We have the ingredients for peace. We have the environment and the people, in spite of the fact that we have difficulties with the Palestinian side in Gaza, Hamas, extremism, but still we have the body politics. And we have one partner who is ready to do it and another partner who doesn't, he's not ready. And our hope is that there will be a third party, specifically Obama, either in this trip or maybe during the year, who will be able maybe to have a change. And if not, our duty as civil society as yesterday was manifested also in the Arab world, also in Israel, we have a huge civil society, very vibrant. Our objective should be to tell our government that if you are not moving towards peace, you are endangering and threatening and putting in jeopardy the whole future of the state of Israel. And we have our democratic ways, and through democracy, we should change the government if this government will not lead towards peace, because from the point of view of Israel, peace will make our future, and without peace, we will put our life and our existence in threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very stimulating talk, and one which I'm sure actually did bring some questions to the fore and to your minds. And we have, this time I think we have a microphone. Yes? So that there will be no issue And you know how to work that, right? Turn on the mute button, okay? Do I see somebody who would like to, okay, in the tradition of scholarly exchange, we'll start with our speaker from yesterday, Dr. Sadiq Al-Azmi. Microphone.
Thanks a lot, Ron.
It's okay.
Okay, I appreciate your approach of private lives impacting public events and public events at the same time impacting private lives. Now, there are voices coming out from Israel and voices coming out from the Arab world that predict that the two-state solution is passé, is over, and that the dynamics of the conflict are moving in the direction of really a single state with two people. And the dark interpretation of this is that for the Palestinian it will be nearer to apartheid rather than some kind of real citizenship, democracy, civil society, and so on. What do you think of these voices coming up and making these predictions?
Well, these are voices which are based on despair. These are not voices which are really trying to encourage. There are some, but they are the minority. But the majority are voices which are looking at the situation and looking at different scenarios and see that what is going to happen is that Israel will not accept a solution which is based on what I try to portray, and the Palestinians eventually will not accept the continuation of occupation, which will eventually lead to the collapse of Palestinian Authority, for example, reoccupation of the territories. On the one hand, or there are others who are trying to say that eventually there will be a Palestinian majority in the area that Israel is controlling, and maybe it will lead to something which would be a nice idea of one-state solution with the ability of one person, one vote. I don't see in the close future a one person, one vote situation. What I see is either a peace which will be happening as a result of a dialogue, or even happening as a result of pressure by United States, Europe, and others, or the alternative is the collapse, chaos, maybe intifada, re-entry of Israel into the territories, and not a one-state solution, but actually going back to the occupation. Then I presume that eventually this will backfire and will bring us back to negotiations, because at the end of the day, this situation will endanger Israel even more. So maybe I'm too optimistic, but I believe that eventually we will be able to strike a deal with the Palestinians based on two states, based on these parameters. I hope it will be now, before a chaotic situation which will unfortunately demand also the life of many people, because at the end of the day we'll come to the same junction of finding a situation which will answer the two national self-determination position and two states for two peoples. Please.
Doctor?
Is it on? Are you sure it's on? Did you press it
Never
on?
mind. Just talk loud.
Just talk loud.
Thank you.
According to Dean Leonard, it's on.
Doesn't matter.
I've studied the situation following it from an early stage in high school, now where I am, as a freshman in college. And it seems like the more I see the cycles of the situation, the Palestinians and the Israelis, especially the hardliners on both sides, go through phases where they convince their own sides whether or not the other is enough of a threat. You especially see that in Hamas, where even in the 2007 elections, the Palestinians of Gaza voted overwhelmingly for the members of Hamas to the point where they actually Gaza and the Fatah-controlled West Bank. Reference the Palestinians as one group when there is such a divided situation between the Palestinians.
Well, this is one of the main problems which might become a hurdle for any solution. But still, as much as we understand the situation and the Palestinians themselves, the argument is that if a solution will be achieved, then Hamas will turn into the real proportion in the population, which is not more than 20%. I just would like to remind all of us that 3-4 weeks ago, there was a demonstration against Hamas in Gaza, in which over 500,000 people went out to the streets, out of a population of 1.2, 1.5, meaning almost every third Palestinian was out in the street against Hamas. And our assumption, also based on this, that if Abu Mazen will come to his people, achieving a real agreement which will bring real assets and achievements to the Palestinian population, and if it will go to a referendum, he will have an overwhelming majority, and the Hamas eventually will be accepting this as a fait accompli, as reality, and trying to fight from within. I presume that he will have difficulties. They will try to assassinate him, if not Hamas, the jihad. We will have similar problems on the Israeli side. I presume any prime minister who will try to do it in Israel also will be threatened, to be assassinated, as happened to Rabin. I hope it won't happen, but this is this is part of the situation, and this is the risk that one should take if you would like to be head of state. In the past, the answer would be maybe yes. Today, I think Syria, and here we have a better expert, Syria will not do anything against it. It's not in the realm of interest today. And I don't think that Iran is against peace to the extent that will try to sabotage it. I don't think so. There will be other groups. There will be many groups, maybe in Lebanon, definitely in the Palestinian territories, and definitely in the Israeli territories. There will be sabotagers, and people will try to be destroyers of any process. But again, I think that even if it means that we will have to clash with our opposition, and the Palestinians will have to clash with their opposition, eventually it serves the interests of both sides, and I think that the alternative is worse than any of these things to happen.
I don't think that Dr. Pundak needs to totally belittle the fact that Iran does support Hezbollah, does support a much harder line, and we know. I think what he's trying to say is that very optimistic view that negative forces will not overcome the recognized need and the hope.
I will add that immediately after the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which was accepted in Beirut in March, the next phase was that they went to the Islamic conference of 57 Islamic countries in Tehran. And actually they endorsed the Arab Peace Initiative in Tehran. It's not that the Iranians were so supportive, but they allowed it to happen. So my conclusion is that if we want to solve our problems with Iran, one of the ways is to solve the problem with the Palestinians.
And then if there's one more question after this comment.
Yeah. In Iran, the attitude or the policy towards Israel, the antagonism and so on, is really high realpolitik. There is no gut reaction, okay, necessarily as in the Arab world. In the Arab world, it's not just high level politics, but there is a very strong gut reaction on the part of the people. So I think we have to be very careful in distinguishing between the kind of enmity that Iran shows to Israel than what the Arabs do or the Palestinians. But I would like to ask you, since you were directly involved in the Oslo agreements, you remember the hopes were very high at that time. Why do you think it disintegrated and decayed in such a way?
Well, I think that the main problem is that the sides started to position themselves towards the second stage and allowed things to happen as part of this game of power, things like the continuation of the settlement building or terrorism on the other side, which deteriorated actually the trust between the two sides. And without trust among the two sides, actually the whole environment started to collapse. Add to this the fact that instead of having immediately an end game regarding what will happen at the second stage of negotiations, things were a bit blurred. I think that Israel should have, at an early stage, tell the two sides, us including, meaning the Israeli population as well as the Arab population, that we are heading towards two states, that we are heading towards two capitals in Jerusalem, to have at least the end game, even in general terms, put in order to strengthen the activities of both sides towards peace. So without an end game and with terrible realities on the ground starting at that time, things were beginning to collapse. And when Netanyahu came to power in 1996, which is just 2 years after Oslo, he added, I would say, oil into the fire, and the rest is history.
And there was, I'd like to add something here that, because it's hard to think of it all, but Yasser Arafat, who was then really the leader of the negotiations, really, my impression, my understanding is that he didn't feel that he could make moves without the support of the Arab world. And when it came to something like Jerusalem, that was going to be
This is in 2000, but the collapse started much earlier.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, there's layers upon layers here. So, in any case, is there another question? We discussed this out in public, and now there will be a chance to discuss it in quieter groups around some food, which you'll find in the library lecture. Please join me in thanking our guest speaker, Dr. Ryan.